The first sign that something had changed was the silence. All across the galaxy, human voices disappeared from communication networks. Human trade ships stopped arriving at alien ports. Human researchers stopped answering messages from their colleagues. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from galactic civilization overnight. Then the ships began to appear. Admiral Lee Dae-ho stood on the command bridge of the Retribution, a massive dreadnought that was larger than any vessel the Kalthani had ever constructed. The ship's armor was black as space itself, and its weapons could destroy entire fleets. Around the Retribution flew 2,000 other warships, each one designed for a specific type of warfare. The bridge crew wore dark blue uniforms that no alien had seen before. These were not the light gray uniforms of humanity's peaceful defense fleet. These were the colors of war, worn by people who had been preparing for this moment their entire lives while pretending to live normal civilian careers. Captain Park Ji-ho commanded the massive carrier Fury from her flight control center. The ship's hangar bays were filled with fighter craft that looked nothing like human exploration vehicles. These were sleek predators built for space combat, each one faster and more deadly than anything in the Kalthani fleet. Park had been flying civilian transport ships for 20 years, or so the galaxy believed. In reality, she had been secretly training with military fighters every month, keeping her combat skills sharp while waiting for the day she might need them. That day had finally come. General Oh Seung-min directed the siege fleet from his flagship, the Judgment. His vessels were slower than the other human ships but carried the most powerful weapons ever built by any species. These siege ships were designed to destroy fortified positions that could resist normal attacks. Oh had spent his career as a civilian architect, designing beautiful buildings and public spaces across human territory. His real projects had been military installations and weapon systems that incorporated technology decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen. The human fleet moved through space in perfect formation without using any communication signals that aliens could detect. They relied on quantum communication networks that were impossible to intercept or jam. Every ship knew exactly where to go and what to do without needing to talk to the others. Commander Baek Yu-jin operated from a specialized vessel filled with broadcasting equipment. Her job was to ensure the galaxy understood what was happening and why. As the human fleet traveled toward Kalthani space, she transmitted messages to every alien government explaining humanity's actions. The Kalthani Empire has committed genocide against peaceful human colonies, her broadcasts explained. They have murdered millions of innocent people, including children, teachers, and farmers. The galaxy refused to provide justice, so humanity will deliver it ourselves. The psychological warfare had already begun. Baek's messages included detailed evidence of Kalthani war crimes, complete with names, dates, and video footage. She also shared historical information about human military capabilities, reminding other species that humans had once been the most feared warriors in the galaxy. Specialist Lee Hae-jin continued her cyber attacks from within the fleet. As human ships approached Kalthani territory, she systematically destroyed their computer networks. Kalthani commanders discovered that their communications were unreliable. Their sensors provided false information, and their weapons sometimes refused to fire. Lee had spent years studying every detail of Kalthani technology while pretending to work as a simple computer repair technician. Now she used that knowledge to turn their own systems against them. When Kalthani ships tried to coordinate their defenses, they received contradictory orders. When they called for help, their messages were sent to empty space. The first battle took place at Kethmore, a Kalthani frontier world that had served as a staging area for the attacks on human colonies. The planet was protected by 50 warships and a massive orbital defense station that could destroy most alien fleets single-handedly. The engagement lasted exactly 17 minutes. Colonel Won Jae-hyun led the assault with precision that amazed even his own troops. The human ships did not charge forward like typical military fleets. Instead, they moved in complex patterns that confused the Kalthani defenders. Human weapons struck from impossible angles, hitting targets that should have been protected by shields and armor. The Kalthani warships were not destroyed in the usual way. They were disabled so completely that they could no longer function as fighting vessels. Their weapons were burned out, their engines were crippled, and their life support systems were damaged. The crews were left alive but helpless, floating in space waiting for rescue. The orbital defense platform that had taken 20 years to build was reduced to scrap metal in less than 5 minutes. Human siege weapons tore through its armor like it was made of paper, leaving nothing but twisted debris where the mighty fortress had been. When the battle ended, the planetary government surrendered immediately. They had never witnessed such overwhelming technological superiority. Their strongest defenses had been swept aside as if they were toys made by children. War Prime Vexthul received the battle reports with growing terror. His commanders described human ships that moved unlike anything they had ever encountered. The vessels used weapons that seemed to ignore the normal laws of physics. They coordinated their attacks with a precision that suggested they shared a single mind. But what truly frightened Vexthul was the restraint the humans had shown. They could have killed everyone at Kethmore, but they chose not to. They disabled the defenses and left the crews alive. This was not the behavior of typical conquerors seeking territory or resources. The human fleet did not pause after their victory at Kethmore. They moved through Kalthani space like an unstoppable storm, striking every world that had participated in or supported the attacks on human colonies. Each battle was swift and decisive. Each victory demonstrated capabilities that no one in the galaxy had suspected. Captain Song Minji commanded a group of stealth ships that struck at Kalthani supply lines. Her vessels were completely invisible to enemy sensors, able to appear anywhere without warning. She targeted the logistics networks that kept the Kalthani military functioning, destroying supply depots and communication stations while carefully avoiding any targets that might harm civilians. Song had been working as a shipping coordinator for a civilian transport company while secretly mapping every supply route and communication network in known space. She knew exactly which targets would cripple enemy military operations without affecting their civilian population. The galaxy watched in amazement as humanity displayed a form of warfare that most species had never imagined possible. Human forces were devastating in combat, but careful to minimize unnecessary casualties. They destroyed military targets with surgical precision while protecting non-combatants. They showed mercy to defeated enemies while remaining absolutely ruthless toward those who continued to resist. This was not the brutal conquest that the Kalthani had inflicted on human colonies. This was justice being delivered by beings who understood the difference between necessary violence and senseless cruelty. Admiral Lee monitored the campaign from the Retribution's bridge, watching as each victory brought humanity closer to the final confrontation with War Prime Vexthul. But Lee was not interested in simple revenge. He wanted the galaxy to understand that humanity's peaceful nature had been a choice, not a weakness. The Kalthani Empire was vast, but it was not prepared for the systematic campaign that humanity was conducting. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and intimidation tactics. They had never faced an enemy that was both more technologically advanced and more strategically disciplined. As human forces captured world after world, other alien species began to reconsider their positions. Some governments that had refused to help humanity now offered their support, realizing that the Kalthani Empire had been a threat to everyone, not just humans. Others remained neutral but watched carefully, learning important lessons about the species they thought they understood. The Kalthani military began to collapse under the sustained pressure. Some commanders chose surrender rather than face human fleets in hopeless battles. Others attempted to flee to distant parts of the galaxy. A few tried to negotiate, offering to return conquered territory in exchange for peace. But humanity was not interested in half measures. They had offered the Kalthani 72 hours to surrender and make proper reparations. That offer had been rejected with laughter and threats. Now there was only one acceptable outcome: complete surrender and justice for the millions who had died. War Prime Vexthul retreated to Kalth Prime, the heavily fortified homeworld of the Kalthani Empire. He gathered his remaining forces around the planet, preparing for a final desperate battle, his fleet still numbered in the hundreds, supported by orbital defense platforms and planetary weapon systems. Vexthul convinced himself that he could still win. His homeworld had never been successfully attacked in the entire history of his species. The defenses were so powerful that most alien fleets would be destroyed before they could even approach the planet. The War Prime refused to believe that his empire was doomed. War Prime Vexthul stood in his war room, looking at the holographic display that showed 3 human colonies glowing like small stars. New Sol, Terra Nova, and Peaceful Valley were home to millions of humans who had no idea what was coming. They lived quiet lives, growing food and raising families, believing they were safe in their peaceful corner of the galaxy. The destruction of the Peaceful Dawn had proven everything Vexthul believed about human weakness. When their ship was destroyed, the humans held memorial services and accepted it as a tragic accident. They did not send warships to investigate. They did not make threats or demands. They simply mourned their dead and moved on. This reaction convinced Vexthul that humans would never fight back, no matter what happened to them. They were a species of cowards who preferred talking to fighting. This made them perfect targets for the Kalthani Empire's expansion plans. Vexthul's generals gathered around the tactical display, their crystal bodies reflecting the light from the star maps. General Crixnell, his most trusted commander, pointed at the 3 target colonies with one sharp claw. "The attacks will begin simultaneously," Crixnell said in his harsh voice. "Our forces will strike without warning during their morning work shift. Maximum casualties, minimum resistance." The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Kalthani fleets would appear above each colony and begin bombing population centers immediately. They would target schools, hospitals, homes, and workplaces where the most people would be killed. The goal was not just conquest but terror. Commander Yun Jinwoo was having breakfast with his wife and daughter on New Seoul Colony when the first alarms began screaming. He worked as the head of colony defense, but his job mostly involved coordinating responses to equipment failures and space storms. New Seoul had been peaceful for over 60 years. The alarm system had different sounds for different types of emergencies. Yoon had heard the alerts for fire, medical emergencies, and technical problems many times. But the sound filling the air now was one he had only heard during training exercises. It was the alarm for hostile military action. Yoon ran to his home computer and accessed the colony's sensor network. What he saw made his hands shake with shock. 50 Kalthani warships were emerging from hyperspace above the colony, their weapons already charging for attack. The first bombs fell on the main city center, while families were starting their daily routines. Children were walking to school when buildings exploded around them. Parents rushing to work were caught in the open when the second wave of attacks hit the residential districts. Yoon's training took over despite his terror. He activated the colony's emergency broadcast system and ordered all civilians to evacuate immediately. New Seoul had transport ships that could carry the entire population to safety, but only if they had enough time to board them properly. Engineer Han Sora was working the morning shift at the main spaceport when the attacks began. She was a small woman with gentle hands, but she understood the massive transport systems better than anyone else on the colony. When the bombs started falling, she knew that getting the evacuation ships launched was the difference between life and death for everyone. The spaceport shook as Kalthani bombs exploded nearby. Sora ran through the corridors checking the status of the 6 large passenger ships docked at the port. Each vessel could carry 50,000 people, enough to evacuate the entire colony if they could fill and launch them quickly. Kalthani ground troops landed like deadly rain across the colony's surface. They wore armor that looked like their natural crystal skin and carried weapons designed to kill as many people as possible. Their orders were simple: prevent the humans from escaping and maximize the number of deaths. Commander Yoon coordinated the evacuation from the colony's defense center. His security force consisted of only 200 guards armed with basic weapons. They were trained to handle criminals and accidents, not military invasions by alien warriors. But Yoon's people fought anyway. They used their knowledge of the colony's layout to slow down the Kalthani troops, buying precious minutes for civilians to reach the spaceport. Guard Captain Lee Min-soo led his team in a desperate defense of the main evacuation route, knowing they could not win, but determined to give their people a chance to escape. Han So-ra worked frantically to prepare the transport ships for launch. Her maintenance team stayed with her despite the danger, knowing that their work would save thousands of lives. The first ship was ready within 20 minutes, and So-ra watched with relief as 50,000 colonists lifted off toward safety. The second and third ships followed quickly. So-ra felt hope growing in her chest as more and more people escaped the violence below, but the Kalthani were learning to adapt their attacks. They began targeting the spaceport directly, trying to prevent more launches. Commander Yoon received a call from his wife during the evacuation. She was at the elementary school, helping teachers get the children to the transport vehicles. Her voice was calm and steady, but Yoon could hear explosions getting closer in the background. "I'm proud of you," she told him over the communication system. "You're saving so many people today." Those were the last words Yoon ever heard from her. A Kalthani bomb hit the school 3 minutes later. The 4th and 5th transport ships launched successfully despite increasing enemy fire. Han Sora had saved 250,000 people, but there were still hundreds of thousands more who needed to escape. She began preparing the 6th and final ship, the colony's last hope. Kalthani soldiers broke through the spaceport's outer defenses as Sora was conducting the final launch checks. She could see them on the security monitors moving through the corridors toward the launch control room where she worked. Sora faced an impossible choice. She could run and save herself or stay and ensure the final ship could launch with its cargo of 50,000 refugees. She looked at the monitors showing desperate families boarding the last transport and made her decision. Stayed at her post. Sora locked the control room doors and continued working as the Kalthani tried to break in. The 6th transport ship's engines came online just as enemy soldiers smashed through her barriers. She was still typing launch commands when their weapons found her. Engineer Han Sora died at her controls, but her sacrifice allowed the final transport to escape. She had saved 300,000 people with her life's work. Commander Yoon watched the last ship disappear into hyperspace and felt both relief and despair. He had managed to evacuate more than half of New Seoul's population, but almost 2 million people had not made it to the ships in time. The colony that had been his home for 30 years was burning around him. Yoon's final act was to send a message to Admiral Lee Dae-ho on Earth. The transmission was brief but important. New Seoul colony destroyed by Kalthani forces. This was not an accident. 2 million dead, 300,000 evacuated. Remember us. The message was sent just as a Kalthani missile destroyed the defense center. Commander Yoon Jin-woo died knowing that Earth would learn the truth about what had happened. The same attacks were happening at Terra Nova and Peaceful Valley. Millions of innocent humans died in those first terrible hours. The Kalthani made sure the galaxy could see the destruction, broadcasting images of burning cities and fleeing refugees to every world in known space. Ambassador Choi Soo-jin received the emergency reports in her office on Earth. She watched the footage of her people being murdered and felt something break inside her heart. These were not soldiers or warriors being killed, but teachers, farmers, children, and grandparents who had never hurt anyone. Choi immediately called for an emergency session of the Galactic Council. She stood before representatives from 50 different alien species and begged them to help humanity. She showed them the videos of the attacks and asked for military intervention to protect the remaining human colonies. The response was disappointing and painful. Most alien representatives offered their sympathy and agreed that the attacks were terrible, but they would not send their armies to help. Some species were afraid of making the Kalthani angry. Others did not want to get involved in what they saw as someone else's war. The council voted to impose economic sanctions on the Kalthani Empire. They would not trade with them or sell them certain goods, but they would not send ships or soldiers to protect human colonies from more attacks. War Prime Vexthul appeared before the Galactic Council through a holographic transmission. His crystal face showed no emotion as he defended his actions. He claimed that the human colonies had been secret military bases preparing to attack Kalthani space. The lies were obvious to anyone who knew the truth. But Vexthul presented fake evidence that some council members wanted to believe. He showed pictures of human farming equipment and claimed they were weapons. He said human research stations were really spy bases gathering intelligence for invasion plans. Ambassador Choi tried desperately to prove that Vexthul was lying, but she had no evidence to offer. The destroyed colonies could not speak for themselves, and Captain Kim's data about Kalthani military preparations had died with him on the Peaceful Dawn. After the council session, Choi sent an urgent message to Admiral Lee Dae-ho. Her words were simple but filled with desperation. "The galaxy will not help us. We are alone against the Kalthani." Deep beneath the mountains of Earth, in tunnels that did not appear on any public map, Master Sergeant Lim Chang-ho received a message that changed everything. The communication came at midnight, encoded with security keys he had hoped never to see. The message contained only 4 words: "Wake up the giant." Lim had been waiting for this signal his entire adult life. He was 45 years old and had spent 25 of those years maintaining weapons and facilities that the galaxy believed no longer existed. To his neighbors, he was a quiet man who worked for the Parks Department, keeping Earth's nature reserves clean and beautiful. They had no idea what his real job was. Lim walked through corridors carved from solid rock, past doors marked with symbols that had not been used since humanity's last great war. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he made his way to the central command room. Behind every door he passed lay weapons, vehicles, and equipment that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The truth about humanity was more complex than any alien species realized. When humans joined the galactic community 200 years ago, they had made a choice to put away their weapons and become peacemakers. But they were not foolish. They knew that someday someone might force them to remember how to fight. So they created Project Sleeping Giant. Fleet Admiral Kang Hyun-soo was supposed to be dead. Official galactic records showed that he had died peacefully 50 years ago, with full military honors and speeches about his contributions to galactic peace. But the man who walked into the secret command center beneath Earth was very much alive. Admiral Kang looked older than his actual age, with gray hair and deep lines on his face from decades of carrying heavy secrets. He had spent 50 years hoping he would never need to use the weapons and soldiers he had spent his life maintaining. The images from New Sol Colony had changed everything. Kang had watched the footage of families being killed by Kalthani soldiers. He had seen Engineer Han Sora die at her post trying to save others. He had heard Commander Yoon's final message before his defense station was destroyed. The time for hiding was over. Dr. No Yoonji worked in a research facility that the public thought studied new ways to grow food more efficiently. In reality, she was one of humanity's most brilliant weapons designers. For decades, she had been secretly modifying civilian technology, always thinking about how it could be converted for military use if necessary. The mining lasers that carved tunnels in asteroid colonies could be refocused to cut through enemy ship armor. The cargo vessels that carried supplies between worlds could be fitted with weapons and turned into destroyers. The communication networks that connected human space could become command systems for military operations. Dr. No had spent her career making sure that if humanity ever needed to fight again, they would have the tools to do it properly. Now that day had come. Captain Shin Min-ho commanded what appeared to be a simple cargo ship called the Quiet Prophet. To anyone who saw him, he was a friendly merchant who transported goods between human colonies and always had a joke to share. But the Quiet Prophet carried sensors more advanced than anything the Kalthani possessed. For weeks, Captain Shin had been watching Kalthani movements throughout their territory. He knew which ships had attacked the human colonies. He knew where their supply bases were located. He knew the names of the commanders who had given orders to kill civilians. All of this information was now being sent to Admiral Kang's command center. The transformation of humanity began quietly across their territory. People who seemed like ordinary citizens received coded messages and disappeared from their normal lives. A teacher on Mars left her classroom and went to a hidden military base. A farmer on Europa revealed that his crops had been hiding weapons testing facilities. A shop owner on Titan admitted that his store was actually a recruitment center for special operations. Many of the people killed in the colony attacks had been more than simple civilians. They were retired soldiers, former intelligence agents, and disguised military personnel who had been living normal lives while staying ready for the day when humanity might need them again. The Kalthani had no idea how many trained fighters they had actually killed. Commander Baek Yu-jin had been working as a news reporter for 15 years. She interviewed interesting people and wrote stories about daily life in human space. But her real expertise was in information warfare. She understood how to use news and propaganda as weapons, how to turn public opinion into a military advantage. Beck began broadcasting the truth about the Kalthani attacks across the galaxy. She made sure every species could see the real footage of families being murdered, of children running from crystal soldiers, of heroes like Engineer Han Sora dying to save others. She wanted the galaxy to understand exactly what the Kalthani had done. But more importantly, Beck began showing historical footage of humanity's military past. She reminded the galaxy that humans had once been among the most effective warriors in known space. Many younger aliens had never seen images of human soldiers in combat or human warships engaging in battle. Specialist Lee Hae-jin worked from a small apartment on a minor colony world. Her neighbors thought she repaired computers for a living. In reality, she was one of the most skilled hackers in the galaxy. Lee had been monitoring alien computer networks for decades, learning their weaknesses and mapping their systems. When Admiral Kang gave the order, Lee launched cyber attacks that the Kalthani never saw coming. She used their own communication systems to send false information to their commanders. She made their weapons target wrong coordinates. She caused their supply computers to deliver resources to empty space instead of their military bases. Colonel Wan Jae-hyun appeared from a facility hidden inside an asteroid mining operation. For 30 years, he had been training soldiers in secret, keeping alive the fighting techniques that humanity had developed through centuries of warfare. His troops were few in number but far more advanced than anything the galaxy had seen. Wan's soldiers did not fight like the brutal Kalthani warriors. They used precision strikes that targeted only military objectives while avoiding harm to civilians. When they attacked enemy supply depots, they made sure to evacuate all non-military personnel first. When they destroyed communications equipment, they left medical emergency channels working. This was not just about winning the war. It was about proving that humanity could fight without becoming monsters. Admiral Lee Dae-ho coordinated all of this from his official headquarters on Earth. To the public and the galaxy, he still appeared to be the peaceful commander of humanity's small defense fleet, but in secret, he was working with Admiral Kang to prepare the largest military operation in human history. Lee's official fleet consisted of only 50 ships designed for exploration and defense. The galaxy knew about these vessels and did not consider them threatening. What the galaxy did not know was that hidden shipyards across human space had been building and maintaining a shadow fleet of over 2,000 warships. These were not simple defense vessels like the ones aliens had seen before. They were advanced instruments of war, incorporating 200 years of secret technology development. They carried weapons that could destroy planets, shields that could withstand the combined firepower of most alien fleets, and engines that could cross the galaxy in days rather than weeks. The Kalthani had made a critical mistake in understanding human nature. They believed that choosing peace meant being incapable of violence. They thought that 200 years of diplomatic behavior had made humans weak and soft. They were about to learn that humanity had not forgotten how to wage war. War Prime Vexthal received reports of unusual activity in human space, but he dismissed them as panic reactions. Some Kalthani patrol ships had disappeared, but he assumed they had been destroyed by desperate civilians or automated defense systems. A few supply convoys had been lost, but space travel was always dangerous. Vexthal was focused on preparing his next attack against Earth itself. He was assembling the largest Kalthani fleet in history to destroy humanity's homeworld. He planned to broadcast the attack live across the galaxy, showing every species what happened to those too weak to defend themselves. The War Prime had no idea that his communications were being monitored by Specialist Lee, that his fleet movements were being tracked by Captain Shin, and that his entire invasion plan was already known to Admiral Kang's command center. Admiral Lee sent one final diplomatic message to the Kalthani Empire. The transmission was broadcast across the galaxy, so every species could hear it. Lee's voice was calm and professional, but there was something different in his tone that had not been heard from humanity in 2 centuries. War Prime Vexthal and the Kalthani Empire, Lee said clearly. You have 72 standard hours to withdraw from human space and surrender for trial on charges of genocide. You will provide compensation for the destroyed colonies and submit to galactic justice. This is your only warning. The message was met with laughter from Kalthani command centers. Vexthal himself appeared on galactic news networks, mocking the human demands. He said that weak species did not give orders to strong ones. He promised that Earth would burn like the colonies had burned. The morning sun shone through the windows of the research station as Dr. Park Mi-young adjusted her telescope. She had been studying the stars for 15 years, and every day still brought her joy. The view from Harmony Point was beautiful, showing 3 different solar systems spread across the dark space like glowing jewels. Park was a xenobiologist, which meant she studied alien life forms from across the galaxy. Her work helped different species understand each other better. She believed that knowledge could solve most problems between races. If aliens could learn about each other, they would have no reason to fight. The research station was quiet this morning. Most of her colleagues were still sleeping since the night shift had just ended. Park liked working alone in the early hours. It gave her time to think and observe without distractions. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat down at her main computer. Today she planned to check the energy readings from the outer rim sectors. These were areas of space that bordered several different alien territories. Park's job was to monitor them for any unusual activity that might indicate new life forms or interesting phenomena. As she scrolled through the data, something caught her attention. There were strange energy patterns coming from the direction of Calthani space. The readings looked different from normal stellar activity. They seemed more organized, more purposeful. Park frowned as she studied the numbers on her screen. The Calthani Empire was known throughout the galaxy as a peaceful trading partner. They were a species that looked like walking crystals, with bodies that reflected light in beautiful patterns. Their ships were elegant and their diplomats were always polite. They had been good neighbors to humanity for over 50 years. But these energy readings suggested something unusual was happening in their territory. Park ran the data through her analysis programs, trying to determine what could be causing such patterns. The computer suggested several possibilities, but one made her stomach feel tight with worry. The energy signatures looked very similar to weapons testing. Park shook her head, telling herself she was being paranoid. The Calthani had signed treaties promising they would not develop new military technology. They were members of the Galactic Peace Council. They had no reason to build weapons. Still, the readings bothered her. Park decided to send the data to Captain Kim Tae-jin on the exploration vessel, Peaceful Dawn. Kim was young but very smart, and he had experience with different types of alien technology. If anyone could explain these strange readings, it would be him. Captain Kim received Park's message while his ship was traveling between colonies. The Peaceful Dawn was not a warship, but an exploration vessel designed for making contact with new civilizations. Kim's crew consisted of scientists, diplomats, and engineers. They carried no weapons except for basic defense systems. Kim read through Park's data carefully. He had studied Calthani technology during his training at the Space Academy. The energy patterns in the data did look suspicious. They reminded him of the signatures produced by particle beam weapons and shield generators. Kim called his science officer, Lieutenant Cho Hai-wan, to look at the information. Cho was an expert in alien technology and had visited Calthani world several times. She studied the data for an hour before giving her opinion. "Captain," she said, "these readings are definitely artificial. They're not natural stellar phenomena. Someone is testing high-energy equipment in Calthani space." Kim felt a chill run down his spine. Testing high-energy equipment could mean many things, but combined with the organized nature of the signals, it suggested military preparations. The question was whether the Calthani government knew about it, or if someone was conducting secret operations. "Plot a course for the edge of Calthani territory," Kim ordered. "We need to get better sensor readings. If something is happening there, the galaxy needs to know about it." The Peaceful Dawn changed course and headed toward the border of Calthani space. Kim's orders were to explore and gather information, which gave him the authority to investigate unusual phenomena. He was not breaking any galactic laws by conducting long-range scans from international space. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Lee Dae-ho was attending a meeting of the Terran Defense Council. The meeting was routine, covering patrol schedules and maintenance reports for humanity's small defense fleet. Earth's military was designed for protection and peacekeeping, not conquest or aggressive action. Lee had served in the fleet for 30 years and had never fired a weapon in anger. His ships had rescued stranded civilians, delivered medical supplies during emergencies, and helped settle minor disputes between trading partners. This was the kind of military service that made him proud. The Admiral was reviewing supply requisitions when his communication officer interrupted the meeting. Lieutenant Park Sung-min looked nervous as he approached Lee's desk. "Sir," the lieutenant said quietly, "we've received a priority message from Captain Kim on the Peaceful Dawn. He's requesting permission to conduct detailed scans near Calthani space." Lee looked up from his paperwork. Kim was a reliable officer who did not make unusual requests without good reason. "What's the situation, Lieutenant?" "Dr. Park Mi-young has detected unusual energy readings that might indicate weapons testing. Captain Kim wants to investigate from a safe distance." Lee considered the request. Investigating suspicious activity was part of the fleet's mission to maintain galactic security. As long as Kim stayed in neutral space and did not cross any borders, there should be no diplomatic problems. "Tell Captain Kim he has permission to proceed," Lee said. "But remind him to maintain appropriate distance from Kalthani territory. We don't want to cause any misunderstandings." The Peaceful Dawn spent 3 days at the edge of Kalthani space, using its advanced sensors to scan for the source of the strange energy readings. What they found was disturbing. The signals were coming from multiple locations, suggesting a coordinated effort. The patterns matched weapons testing and fleet exercises. Captain Kim's worst fears were confirmed when they detected large numbers of ships moving in formation. The vessels were using communication frequencies reserved for military operations. Whatever was happening in Kalthani space, it was not peaceful trade or exploration. Kim decided to move closer to get better data. His ship was fast and had excellent stealth capabilities. They could gather the information they needed and return to human space before anyone noticed them. But War Prime, Vexthal had been expecting human curiosity. Vexthal was the military leader of the Kalthani Empire. Though his position was supposed to be ceremonial, the galaxy believed that the Kalthani had given up aggressive warfare generations ago. They were wrong. For months, Vexthal had been secretly building a massive fleet and training soldiers for conquest. His plan was simple: test human weakness by attacking their colonies, then expand Kalthani territory while other species were too frightened to interfere. The War Prime had studied human behavior carefully. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as peacemakers and diplomats. They always tried to solve problems through talking rather than fighting. This made them seem weak to Kalthani eyes. When Vexthal's scouts detected the Peaceful Dawn approaching Kalthani space, he saw an opportunity. He could test human reactions by eliminating their spy ship. If they responded with force, he would know they were more dangerous than expected. If they accepted the loss as an accident, he would know they were as weak as he believed. Vexthal ordered his stealth ships to follow the human vessel and wait for the perfect moment to strike. The attack had to look like an accident so the galaxy would not blame the Kalthani Empire. Captain Kim and his crew spent hours collecting data about Kalthani military preparations. What they discovered was shocking. The Kalthani had built hundreds of warships and were training thousands of soldiers. This was not defensive preparation, but preparation for conquest. Kim knew this information had to reach Earth immediately. The galaxy was in danger, and no one suspected what was coming. He ordered his crew to set course for the nearest human colony where they could send a priority message to Admiral Lee. As the Peaceful Dawn traveled through an asteroid field, taking what seemed like a safe route home, the Kalthani struck. Hidden ships fired projectiles designed to look like natural meteors. The rocks hit the human vessel at high speed, overwhelming its shields and damaging critical systems. Captain Kim tried desperately to save his ship and crew, but the damage was too severe. The Peaceful Dawn's hull cracked and atmosphere began venting into space. Emergency systems failed one by one as more meteors struck the helpless vessel. Kim's last act was to try sending a warning message to Earth, but the ship's communications were destroyed before the transmission could be completed. The Peaceful Dawn exploded in a brilliant flash, taking all evidence of Kalthani preparations with it. War Prime Vexthal watched the destruction from his command ship and smiled. The humans had died without ever knowing they were under attack. Better yet, the destruction looked completely natural to anyone who might investigate later. The Kalthani immediately sent messages of condolence to the human government, expressing sorrow at the tragic accident that had claimed the lives of brave explorers. They offered to help search for survivors, knowing there would be none. The human fleet arrived at Kalth Prime like death itself, 2,000 dark ships spreading across the sky above the Kalthani homeworld. War Prime Vexthal watched from his command bunker deep beneath the planet's surface, counting the vessels that had come to destroy everything he had built. The Kalthani homeworld was the most heavily defended planet in their empire. Massive orbital stations floated in space like metal moons, their weapons powerful enough to crack the surface of a world. 600 warships protected the approaches to the planet, crewed by the finest warriors the Kalthani had ever produced. But as Vexthal studied the human fleet through his sensors, he felt something he had never experienced before: pure terror. The human ships moved with a coordination that seemed impossible. They maintained perfect formation without any visible communication, as if they were controlled by a single vast intelligence. Admiral Lee Dae-ho stood on the bridge of the Retribution, looking down at the world where the orders had been given to murder millions of innocent humans. He had the power to turn Kalth Prime into a lifeless rock floating in space. His weapons could boil the oceans and shatter the continents. But that was not why humanity had come. Lee activated the fleet's communication system and sent a message that reached every ship, every defense station, and every military installation in the Kalth system. His voice carried the authority of a species that had chosen to be peaceful, but was now choosing to be something else. War Prime Vexthul, Lee said, his words echoing across space. I offer you single combat between our fleets. Choose your best ships and your finest commanders. We will settle this with honor. If you defeat me, humanity will withdraw and never return. If I defeat you, the Kalthani Empire surrenders unconditionally and submits to galactic justice. The challenge shocked everyone who heard it. Fleet battles involved hundreds of variables and complex strategies. To reduce such warfare to a simple duel between commanders seemed impossible. But Vexthul saw opportunity in Lee's proposal. If the Kalthani could win this single engagement, they would save their empire and prove their superiority over the humans who had humiliated them. It was a chance to turn certain defeat into glorious victory with one perfect battle. Vexthul accepted the challenge. The two fleets moved to opposite sides of the star system, leaving empty space between them for the coming duel. Vexthul selected his 50 finest warships, including his personal flagship, the Crystal Death. These vessels had destroyed human colonies and killed millions of civilians. Now they would face judgment. Admiral Lee chose 50 ships from his own fleet. The retribution would lead them into battle, supported by Captain Park Ji-ho's carrier Fury, General Oh Seung-min's siege ship Judgment, and Colonel Won Jae-hyun's precision attack vessels. Each ship was commanded by officers who had spent decades preparing for this moment. The galaxy watched the preparation through broadcasts transmitted by Commander Baek Yu-jin. Every species in known space could witness the duel that would determine the fate of the Kalthani Empire. Many alien governments placed bets on the outcome, with most expecting the Kalthani to win through superior numbers and battle experience. They had forgotten that humanity had once conquered half the galaxy before choosing peace. The battle began at exactly noon. Kalth prime time. Both fleets accelerated toward each other at maximum speed, weapons charging for the first devastating exchange of fire. To observers, it looked like two walls of metal rushing toward mutual destruction, but Admiral Lee had no intention of fighting a traditional battle. Captain Song Min-ji had spent weeks studying every engagement in Kalthani, military history, analyzing their tactics and identifying their weaknesses. The Kalthani always fought the same way. They formed tight battle lines and tried to overwhelm their enemies with concentrated firepower. They were brave but predictable. When the fleets were almost close enough to fire, the human ships suddenly scattered in a pattern that seemed random, but was actually precisely calculated. Half the vessels accelerated upward from the battle plane while the other half dove downward. The Kalthani fleet, committed to their forward charge, flew into empty space. War Prime Vexthul realized too late that he had been outmaneuvered. His ships were arranged in perfect formation for attacking enemies directly ahead, but that same formation made them vulnerable to crossfire from above and below. Human weapons struck his fleet from angles they could not defend against. The Crystal Death was the most powerful warship the Kalthani had ever built, with armor that could resist the combined firepower of most alien fleets. But the weapons hitting it now incorporated 200 years of secret human technological development. Energy beams that could cut through any known material struck the flagship's hull like lightning from an angry god. Captain Park Ji-ho launched her fighter squadrons at the perfect moment. While the large Kalthani ship struggled to turn and face the human fleet, her small craft swept in to attack their engines and weapon systems. The fighters moved like a swarm of deadly insects, too fast and agile for the enemy's heavy guns to target. General Oh Seung-min's siege weapons proved their worth against warships as well as fortifications. The massive energy cannons that could destroy cities punched through Kalthani armor, like it was made of thin metal sheets. Ships that had seemed invincible were torn apart by weapons designed to crack planets. Colonel Won Jae-hyun coordinated the precision strikes that disabled enemy vessels without completely destroying them. His forces targeted command bridges, weapon control systems, and navigation computers. Kalthani ships found themselves unable to fight back or even maneuver properly. The decisive moment came when Captain Song Min-ji executed a maneuver that no one expected. Using stealth technology that made her ship invisible to sensors, She appeared directly behind the Crystal Death and fired a single, perfectly aimed shot at the flagship's main reactor control system. The blast did not destroy Vexthol's ship, but it shut down every major system aboard the vessel. The Crystal Death became a helpless hulk floating in space, its weapons offline, its shields failed, and its communication systems dead. The most powerful ship in the Kalthani fleet had been defeated by a single precise strike. The battle lasted 43 minutes. When it ended, every Kalthani vessel was either destroyed or surrendering. War Prime Vexthol found himself trapped aboard his powerless flagship, watching his empire die around him. Admiral Lee opened a communication channel to the Crystal Death. His image appeared on what remained of Vexthol's bridge displays. Calm and professional despite having just won the most important naval battle in galactic history. War Prime Vexthol, Lee said quietly. Your empire surrenders unconditionally as agreed. You will be tried for war crimes against innocent civilians. Your military will be disbanded. Your government will pay reparations to the families of those you murdered. This is the price of underestimating humanity. The surrender was broadcast across the galaxy. Species that had refused to help humanity now witnessed the complete defeat of the Kalthani Empire by the humans they had thought were too weak to defend themselves. But Admiral Lee was not finished. He opened another communication channel that reached every government in known space. His next words would reshape galactic politics forever. Citizens of the galaxy, Lee began, his voice carrying the authority of ultimate victory. Humanity has proven today that we never forgot how to wage war. We simply chose not to. For 200 years we offered peace, friendship, and cooperation to all species. We hoped you would never see this side of our nature. Lee paused, his eyes reflecting the weight of millions of deaths and the responsibility of overwhelming power. Let this serve as a lesson to every species watching these events. We preserved peace not because we were incapable of violence, but because we understood its true cost. We chose to be guardians of civilization rather than its destroyers. But those who mistake our mercy for weakness, those who harm innocent people, believing there will be no consequences, do so at their own peril. The message was heard by every alien leader, every military commander, and every citizen capable of understanding its meaning. Humanity had revealed itself as the most powerful military force in the galaxy, but more importantly, they had shown they could wield that power with wisdom and restraint. War Prime Vexthol was taken to a neutral world where he faced trial for genocide. The evidence against him was overwhelming, presented by survivors of the colony attacks and documented by Commander by X broadcasts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with time to think about the consequences of his arrogance. The Kalthani Empire was dissolved and replaced by smaller, peaceful governments that promised never again to wage aggressive war. The species that had once terrorized their neighbors became farmers and merchants, watched carefully by galactic peacekeepers to ensure they honored their commitments. Ambassador Choi Soo-jin addressed the Galactic Council one final time. The same representatives who had refused to help humanity now listened to her words with respectful attention. She announced the creation of a new galactic defense force, led by humans but open to any species wanting to prevent future genocides. The Council voted unanimously to approve the new organization.